This month, the Texas Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on TPPF's landmark lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Texas extraterritorial jurisdictions, or ETJs. The case raises serious questions about representative government, municipal authority, and what it means to be free. I'm Jose Melendez, campaign director for the Taxpayer Protection Project, and today I'm with a champion for liberty, my colleague Chance Weldon, who serves as director of litigation for the Center for the American Future here at TPPF. Today we're going to delve into TPPF's ETJ case, which will come before the Texas Supreme Court on January 15th, and invite intrigue for countless months thereafter. I know Texans everywhere will be watching the case closely. Chance, why don't you start by explaining what the ETJ is and what powers do cities have in these regions?
Yeah, just the Cliff Notes version is that the ETJ is a 5-mile buffer around the outside of cities, where cities have certain regulatory and fee collecting authority, but individuals there often receive no services and, most importantly, don't have the right to vote for the people who write those regulations.
So how does the ETJ concept run afoul of the Texas Constitution?
So Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution guarantees the people of Texas a Republican form of government. And in 1876, whenever that was ratified, a Republican form of government meant that you had some democratic check on the people who regulate the property where you live. Usually that's voting. This sort of regulation without representation, much like taxation without representation in the American Revolution, has long been deemed to be not Republican and therefore in violation of Article 1, Section 2. And that's what we're trying to get the Texas Supreme Court to recognize.
How did TPPF's lawsuit come about, and how were your clients' rights violated through this?
So our clients, Shana Elliott and Lawrence Kalki, they live in the ETJ of the city of College Station. And they want to do ordinary things with their property, like put up yard signs seasonally, or one of them wants to change their driveway for a mother-in-law suite that they're building for their mother-in-law on the property. But they can't do any of that without getting permission from a city where they don't live, where they receive no services, and most importantly, they have no ability to vote. And they think that's unconstitutional, so they brought us in pro bono to represent them.
Has any district or appellate court ruled on the merits yet? If not, why do you think the judges have been reluctant to weigh in on this case involving someone's, constitutional rights?
No, so that's what I think one of the things that really makes this case interesting is no court has ruled on the merits. Now, this requires us to nerd out a little bit about standing versus the merits and how you get into court. But what's happened in the lower courts so far is they've said that this provision of the Bill of Rights, Article 1, Section 2, is what's called a political question. In other words, if you want this right protected, you need to go to the legislature, not the courts. Now, the problem with that argument is that, of course, Bill of Rights provisions are designed to take things out of the hands of the legislature. They're designed to, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. When we think of Bill of Rights provisions, they're rights that are supposed to be protected by the courts. So thus far, no court's ever opined on whether or not this arrangement is actually unrepublican or violates Article 1, Section 2. Instead, they've said, that's a political question. If you want protection, go to the legislature. We think that's a real problem. I think that's why the Texas Supreme Court took this case, because it's the first time in Texas history that any court in our entire state has ever held that a Bill of Rights provision is outside the scope of judicial protection.
Has the Texas Supreme Court ever considered a case of this nature, or is this relatively new ground for the court?
So the court has never looked at constitutionality of ETJs. There was a case that the court did decide favorably under Article 1, Section 2 back in 1947, but since then, this provision's not been before the court. I will say this, though, the court has repeatedly held prior to this that the political question doctrine, this idea that certain constitutional provisions aren't subject to judicial protection, that's been rejected by the Texas Supreme Court multiple times.
What are TPPF's opponents saying in defense of today's system of regulation without representation?
I mean, I want to be as fair as possible to the other side, but really, if you look at the lower court's opinion, a lot of it is, well, it's been this way for a long time. And what would happen if a court just upended this? This is something that's been this way at least since the 1960s. And who are we as a court to just have two people just upend this system that's been in place, in this case for almost 60 years.
Walk us through what Texans should expect if TPPF's lawsuit is successful. What kind of impact do you expect this case to have on rural and suburban property owners?
Well, ultimately, if we win here at the Texas Supreme Court, we'll go back down to get to finally argue this on the merits as to whether ETJs are ultimately constitutional. And if we win on that, then people that don't want to live, say, for example, in College Station, and they move outside of College Station, well, then they won't be regulated by a city where they don't live. People will be able to only be regulated by cities where they have the right to vote. And I think that would be a huge win for Texans. I think the bigger fear is what happens if we don't win this case at the Texas Supreme Court. If you open up the door to the fact that courts can just decide unilaterally on their own that some provisions of the Texas Bill of Rights don't apply because it's too hard to apply them, that would be a catastrophic result for Texans that would undermine the structure and integrity of our Constitution and our government.
Well, thanks so much, Chance. We look forward to seeing where things go from here.